Bonjour à tous et à toutes. Merci.
Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here today. I'm very happy to introduce this panel on youngsters. My name is Emmanuelle AURIOL. I'm a member of the Cercle des Économiques, and I'm a teacher in Toulouse. And I would like to introduce the panel today, which is remarkable. We're extremely lucky. Let me introduce the panelists, and then I will give you a few words. First intervention, Marjolaine GRONDIN, co-founder and CEO of Elojam. She created a highly successful company with over 600,000 young users. And thanks to this, she was classified by Forbes as one of the best startuppers, as they call them. Today, she will tell us about a survey about discussing acting and changing that was carried out through the platform to question youngsters 18 to 28, and we'll start from France and then go over to the international world. Then we'll be privileged enough to have Florence PARLY, former Minister of the Armies in France. No need to introduce her. And she will tell us about her commitment with young French people who commit for national defense, and an event she created at European level, highly successful event. And these two actions are called the Fabric for Defense in France and in foreign countries to see the will, the desire of youngsters to commit. And then we'll have a man with us, Pascal RUFFENACH, who is CEO of Bayard Presse, and he's a writer as well. And he will tell us about his vision and perception of youngsters, in particular through the mail written by their readers and a think tank they take part in to support youngsters in their commitments in France. And finally, last but not least, we have Hadja, who arrived yesterday from Guinea, and she will tell us about her commitment with youngsters. Her personal experience is incredible. She started her activism at the age of 11 against excision, against violences against women in Guinea, and she will tell us about her commitment as a youngster who wants to change things. So before I give the floor to Marjolaine GRONDIN, let me tell you about a few statistics, because youngsters are not just a uniform heap of people. We all know what youngsters are, but we see them differently. In the 50s, the mid-age was 24, now it's 28. So the global population is aging, and this average figure hides a lot of disparities. This panel shows the French people who speak are more or less 42, apart maybe from Marjolaine, who's younger. In sub-Saharan Africa, the median age is 15. This is the case in Niger, 14.8 years old, and 61% of the population of Niger is under 18. So this difference can be explained by the fact that sub-Saharan Africa is a region of the world that hasn't gone through its demographic transition. A lot of children a lot of youngsters. The experience in a country, if you live in a country where most people are young, is different from the one where most people are old. So, because in this case, they hold all the positions at political level, at job level. It's, I would say, it's like the glass ceiling of all people. So the experience of youngsters is not the same if you're in France or in a foreign country, and but there are indeed fights that they have in common. As Pascal was explaining, in the mail from readers, you have climate change, which is very much mentioned, and gender issues. So there are bridges, but these fights do not necessarily have the same origin. Now, by way of introduction, let me give the floor to Marjolaine, who will explain about the barometer of youth. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here so early. My name is Marjolaine GRONDIN. As you heard, I co-founded Hello Jam, which is a medium which has an exchange with 600,000 youngsters with social messages. We discuss with the youngsters every day about societal issues. For example, we asked them this week, would you like to live to 200 years old, or for humanistic issues, or do you have trouble finding the right films you want to see, to explain the problem of choice? So we asked them questions with a lot of documents to move them to express themselves on major societal issues, which is why we were very happy with the Cercle des Économistes to take part in this initiative, DAC, Discuss, Act and Change, to talk about these major issues like well-being, work, health, environment, and this idea of living together. So we carried out this kind of conversation with Messenger with them, and they could express themselves over the past 6 months on these topics. So we'll have time to discuss, express this. And this morning I felt like starting with a very difficult point. We asked them how they position themselves and view themselves in the world today, and I feel that as far as their future hopes are concerned, the main point is that these youngsters are starting to be in a more precarious situation. They have more and more hopes and commitments, but their force of life has been impacted. So there's more and more commitments, more and more awareness about their mental health, future life, how the institutions went there for them, why the institutions weren't created for them, but at the same time their commitment is stronger. So this is very important, and it's important to listen to them more and more and give them a place to talk. So, for example, I asked, do you feel you're sufficiently supported? Did you want to see a therapist this year? What do you think about your previous political choices? Do you think you'll have a pension, etc.? For the question about better living, 50% of the youngsters feel they are losing faith. And 2 out of 3 feel the need of seeing a therapist, but they don't do it. Half of them don't do it for money issues, financial issues. They say, I don't do it because I don't know where to go, and even if I start, by the time I find the right person, the right treatment, I just haven't got the means, I have no time, etc., which hides a more global money issue. 47% of the 27, 28 years old and 60% of the 18-21 feel they can't do it on their own. So for the youngest amongst them, we feel, well, most of them have parents. But for the 26-28, usually they have a job, and almost half of them say they can't do it on their own. So 73% of them feel that the educational system is not at the right level, and a lot of them feel drowned. And 81% of them feel that they haven't been trained sufficiently before they start on the job market, on the labor market. So what they learn at school and what they would like to learn, there's quite a gap. We talk a lot about the challenges as far as institutions are concerned. More than a third of them feel they are not represented by anyone as citizens. Only a few of them feel that they are better represented by the president, but 25% feel represented best by associations. Sometimes, in fact, they're part of them, or they would like to be part of them. 10% by activists and 10% by local executive elected authorities, but only, as I said, 3% by the president. 31% are affected by social inequalities, and 16% by the values of the Republic. They don't necessarily feel French. They feel they're part of youth, but not necessarily part of France. Half of them, as I said, feel they're losing face. 23% feel they have no means of being heard, 24% use voting as the first means, and 21% social networks. As you know, for votes, youngsters were not the first to vote, and a quarter of them feel they're not heard at all. When they commit, it's for the community because they feel this is the right level, right skill to act, to be heard, and to have a position. So 44% of them feel it's the right skill, then 20% France, 15% Europe, and then their city. For climate change, 1 out of 2, i.e. half of them, which is huge, feel totally powerless when faced with the climate challenge, even though it's their top concern, and 33% consider it's a priority. Yesterday we were talking about the triangle of lack of action with the citizens, the president, and etc. And so how can we move as consumers if the companies don't change? How can a company change if the elected authorities don't change, etc. But 70% of them feel that everybody is responsible on an equal footing. So there's a cognitive difference between what I feel and what I actually do is huge. We might come back to this, but there's a lot of I would like to do things, but I haven't got the means, and they feel they haven't got the keys, and even less with the last 2 years. 19% feel it's the fault of companies and 17% the state, but they're ready to make sacrifices. But 91% of them say they would be ready to pay a higher price to protect the environment, and 84% of them would accept a more authoritative policy. They talk about the carbon tax, about the restriction of right to a flight, maybe a pass to go once for a long haul, etc. They talk about restrictions, and this figure has increased. They want the society to mobilize, but they don't want to sacrifice again if the rest of society doesn't follow suit. And for jobs, more than 1 out of 2 is worried about their professional future and say they have trouble finding a job. We talk a lot about searching for meaning in their job, but 47% of them see their job as a way of making money, and 30% as a search for meaning. A lot of them feel flourishing in their work is an objective, but it's not necessarily something they can do today. They want to dematerialize work, 32-hour week or 4-day week, etc. So we're really on a tipping point. These youngsters have a lot to say. They have a lot of hopes. But today, what we can note today and over the past few years is a very difficult situation. Thank you very much, says Mrs. Auriol. We can see that the society in which they move is not helping them. And it's a bit depressive when you look at the commitments without any support. And in fact, they have a highly protective state when what they're asking for is authority. Well, they don't want to be the only ones to get things changing. So now, if we can have the vision of a commitment at national level, Madam Minister. Well, thank you very much. After this statement that was made, if we had any doubt, we've lost all these doubts. Youngsters don't feel that politics, institutions can represent them and represent them properly. And we do see the issue and the risk for our democracy. And this is very worrying. But what I also heard from what Marjolaine told us, and I'd like, in fact, to applaud her approach, because consulting youngsters everywhere is something that was almost unheard of. What you didn't say is that these youngsters are highly different, highly diversified. There is an international representation, etc. So it's it sheds a lot of light. But we also see that there are contrasted results. Yes, okay, there's a will to commit. And this is very highly valuable, and it's something that democracy should rely on. So they have a commitment. We know they commit for the planet, and this is no news. But as I was reading the results of this survey, I learned quite a lot of more positive aspects that make me more optimistic. For example, the fact that almost 2/3 of the youngsters, as you reminded us, feel that the career ladder is still working. So it's a contrasted issue. I would like to tell you about my experience over when I was in the Ministry of the Armies for 5 years. They take care of the youngsters because we recruit them. We recruit youngsters. The ministry recruits 26 or 27 youngsters a year. It's the top recruiter in France. We were talking about medium age. The median for military men in France or military people is 25 years old. When you talk about all the ranks, the average age is 32. So it is a community that is extremely young. And which this is a contrast with the rest of our society. So the miracle is to manage to recruit 26 or 27,000 youngsters every year that commit for an average period of 27 years. Because since the army was made professional, military people are no longer civil servants. They are hired for contracts of 3 to 5 years, and the ministry tries for them to renew their contracts every time. So it's almost a miracle to manage to recruit so many people every year, because it's a very specific commitment, very special commitment. Probably the strongest form of commitment, the most committing one, if I could say so, because the idea is to protect your country, protect the French people, and to be ready to even sacrifice your life. So this is a very, very special commitment, and finding 27,000 youngsters every year who are ready to consent for this sacrifice is not easy. Why is it possible? I talked about miracle. I must say that every time it was a surprise for me, and it's sort of something that reconciles you with other issues. First of all, it's a possibility because the army is one of the places where society is represented in all its diversity. You can go to the army without any diploma, but you can also get to the army after 10 years of studies, because we do have very specific technological requirements. And when you come in without any studies or any background, you can acquire it. You can get trained, you can acquire qualifications that are useful for the rest of your life, because very few military people, apart from officers who spend their whole career in the army, very few consider that they can spend their whole life serving France and its army. So this diversity is probably more visible in the army. And we see that 10% of the military come from the ultramarine region, and I'm not sure this is something, or the overseas region, and this is not something you see in companies, for example. I cannot give you exact figures because I'm not allowed to, but we also recruit a lot in recruiting centers that are in suburbs around the big cities. I can't tell you if we get a lot of youngsters who come from, who are immigrants, but we do recruit quite a lot of youngsters who come from difficult suburbs and may not have all the assets in hands as they would if they lived elsewhere. What does it lead them to? Well, for some of them, the motivation dates back from their childhood, as you started fighting from the age of 11, and some youngsters dreamed of being in the army since they're children, but it's not the majority. Others feel that by default, it's a place where you can get a professional qualification or diploma when you have none. When you think of it, the salary, the fact that you're housed and fed, if you, all in all, it's not such a bad situation. But these arguments cannot justify the acceptance of the constraints, which are huge, because these youngsters are faced with huge constraints. Even though they come from French society, they don't come from a different pool. We recruit young French people. So they all have their individualities. They all hope to renew with their community, which is not necessarily the military community they live in. So this ability to commit for a wider cause, a cause that is larger than them and their life, comes from multiple factors, and I would like to mention a few which I heard about: the aspiration for a life of adventure and travel, and the practice of sports, which is something which they all have. So once they come, how do we retain them? That's the second challenge. How can we retain them? And how can we make sure that for this probatory period of the first 6 months, where they can perfectly say, well, that's not a life for me, I'm not interested, the rate of people opting out is not negligible, around 25%, but in view of the difficulty and constraints, in my opinion, it's very low. And I feel that what happens is that we belong to a community with a common objective to ensure the protection and defense of our country. The fact that they feel part and parcel of this community, they feel that they are considered as a part of it. It's the notion that you can read in the books and which takes on a highly practical dimension. Brother in arms, you know, means sharing your life on a daily basis and being able to count on your comrades in times where you might face a dangerous situation and where life might be at stake. So this is a cultural shock, but this shock takes place and is highly positive. I know that I'm pressed by time, and one word about Fabrique Défense. So I told you about those who commit in the army. This is a minority, really. But we saw at the time of the 2015 terrorist attacks how these defense issues, the terrorist attacks, put back the threats to which we were exposed at the center of, at the core of problems. Now that our army is a professional one, there's no drafting anymore, where all the boys, because at the time there were no girls, all the boys would come and face these issues of defense and security. There's no possibility for a French society to have that. So we felt it was important to recreate a link between the army and the nation. There is a project, and I hope that it will be done in the next 5 years. It's called the Universal National Service, but it was sort of thwarted by the appearance of COVID. So the idea is to organize events for the age group 15 to 30 to get familiar with these issues of defense and security, not only at national level, but at European level, because I'm absolutely convinced that these are issues for the European level, to enable them to understand better the geopolitical challenges and to get more familiar with the needs and requirements of the army, maybe to start a special professional career for our needs or for the companies that work for the army, because technology is important. If you fight with yesterday's weapons, we will not have the right superiority. So this place, these are events and encounters that we wanted to organize and which enabled, despite COVID, to get several tens of thousands of youngsters together in France and Europe. Thank you very much, madam.
Donc maintenant, l'éclairage.
So, let's listen to the next speaker. So, good morning to all of you. Thank you for your comments and observations. So, educational responsibility and accountability, it doesn't only depend on schools, it depends on us, it depends on lots of people. So we have a think tank at BAH. So we want to show that education is a matter for all of us. Most of the time we think that schools are responsible for that, but it's much more than that. You have associations, you have also CSR, a collective responsibility of companies is at stake. So they should be aware of their responsibilities within society. So new youth commitments to rebound. So it means that we are also rebounding in order to sort out a problem for ourselves. But that begs the question of attitude. So we're in touch with many children, we're in touch with many children, teenagers, children who are 18. Remember the agro-paritech case with lots of comments on the social networks. Oh, you're right, I mean, to rebel, that's great. I mean, this is what people said. Or join us, or the people who are older, young people who are older, find it difficult, I mean, to get the right posture. And it was very difficult for them to have a position of authority. So you can't tell young people you did the right thing when you decided to rebel yourself. It's kind of a shortcut. A second observation that I would like to make, so we've been talking about young people, so we think that when they are 16 or 18, but people are committed when they are 2 years of age, 3 years of age. I mean, we shouldn't forget about the children because there's a lot at stake during childhood. There are some philosophical classes in the primary schools, and when you do that, you can discuss with people, you can understand other people's motives. This is what discussions are all about, and there are some techniques that could be used by families, by schools. It's extremely important. Last year, with the Ministry of National Delegation, we created eco-delegates, 22,000 in France. I mean, in primary schools, in high schools, in junior high schools, and I took part in the projects and I listened to them at the Annecy junior high school. So they had a playground with, they had a project. They fetched architects, engineers, in order to remove tar, to recycle tar. So there were landscaping specialists. So all the skills and competencies were marshaled. So when they were 16, 17 years of age, they started to cooperate together. So the educational system is key. Meritocracy, okay, right. But at the end of the day, it's just a matter of cooperation against competition. If we want to change things, we need to teach children that cooperation is good. So it's a collective endeavor. So in France, we think that we have the savior who will save everybody, but it doesn't work like that, and it has never worked like that. What is important is to cooperate all together. Et si nous, this is a book from François Tadei. François Tadei would like things to change, instilling fresh blood into the French educational system. So it's a matter of cooperation, it's a matter of talking, discussing, and from a very early age, people should feel this sense of community. It can be a military community, it can be an association, and people can get their bearings when they belong to these structures. And this is something that you can feel at a very early age. Bear witness those eco-delegates. So there are two themes that are salient amongst young people. So relationships between men and women. Georges Duby said, people were asked, what has changed the most in 2,000 years? And Georges Duby said, not the atom, but the relationships between men and women of the past 50 years. And our civilization has changed quite a lot. And that's an inexorable trend, and so much the better. So there are different stages as part of this crusade or fight, identity, gender identity. It's a social fight, but it's a personal assessment. Who am I as an individual? Who am I as a person? In the 1970s, I mean, we adopted a political type of approach, but social issues and private issues are intertwined. What is important is the relationships between men and women, and we need to put an end to patriarchy. So, of course, you are not going to address some specific issues at 18 years of age. It's too late. I mean, this should occur at a young age. So it's an endless fight. I mean, the relationships between women and men, but this relationship has to be reinvented. It's a matter of coming up with the images and metaphors young people would relate to. And then the way we relate to the living environment. This approach has changed altogether. So we are in a finished world, in a finite world now. In the past, I mean, we thought that it wasn't the case. And there are lots of people who are worried about the environment, ecology. So, and people are paralyzed. We know the figures. That's why we need to fight. And we need to take up the challenge as well. So young people, they are not involved in the major political choices that are made. So how can we liaise with them in order to make the choices of the future? There are lots of ideas that are emerging. So all the MPs, I mean, should be with an 18-year-old young person, and the young children should be given a vote. There are lots of ideas, and these ideas show that people should have a say. So far, it has been a bit confused. So how can we find new ways for young people to speak? But we need to move away from the current political representations. It doesn't work like that. Bear witness the turnout at the polls during the presidential elections. So I think that we need to come up with means in order to listen to them, to keep abreast of them, and of course we need to take into account what they say. From time to time they have radical positions, and it can be an irksome process because young people want things to be done very quickly. So they come up with radical views, but this is something that we need to pay heed to. So when people are radical, come up with radical views, it has to do with our times, and that's positive, I would say. So we need to keep abreast of them, we need to make them talk, we need to make them write. So in our magazines, we've noticed that young people like to write, and of course writing is not a losing battle. I mean, young people, they've written quite a lot, they've never written so much. And you have the media, you have a press, and there are some communities. The communities play a key role, and they could be involved in various communities, the community of the media, of course. And when you are an educational specialist, whether you are a soldier, a military man, a journalist, we need to provide them with the capacity to act, because there's something that is quite bad, to feel powerless faced with the current world. So this capacity to act, I mean, that's great. Okay. So in a nutshell, we won't have much time for a discussion. So young French people, I mean, they are deprived of soft skills to a certain extent. So Hadja will show us that she has a lot of soft skills. Hadja, go ahead. Thanks a lot. Good morning to all of you. I'm delighted to be with you amongst these prestigious guests that come from Guinea, a country not far from Senegal. So why do I speak in front of you? It's thanks to this school. Thanks to education, my predecessor talked about. I mean, some parents cannot shoulder their responsibility, so it is the duty of a state, it is the duty of the educational system to take up that responsibility. I was fortunate to be at school. I learned many things in Catholic schools, and I learned a lot from my friends because they were very open-minded, so I managed to emancipate myself, and I decided to fight for my rights and for the other children's rights. So I was 11, and I'm the chairwoman of an association defending young girls' rights in the face of gender-based violence, excision, removal of the clitoris. The genitals of the women are being removed, are being cut in part, and the objective is to deprive a young girl of the right to pleasure. So 95% of young girls are excised. So, and Somalia being the first country on this front, so it's atrocious. So thank you for thinking about these millions of girls who are excised, who are forced to marriage, these millions of young girls who are killed and raped. So I represent the voices of these young girls who have no voice, and through my association I want to heighten their awareness. I want to remind them that they can live, that they can survive. I'm talking about survival, because most of young girls are committing suicide because they are subject to forced marriage. And I greeted lots of young girls. And when you have a young girl who's 18 and who wants to speak in the media, who wants to speak with the police, I mean, you can understand the risks entailed. So we are taking lots of risks when it comes to laying claims to our rights. So this is a universal fight, a universal struggle. I'm talking about universality because you have some people, you have some migrants from Guinea. They live in France, they live in other countries, but their parents are not made aware of these questions and issues. So the children are under threat. So this is the holiday period. And during this period, young girls will be sent to forests, villages, and they will be excised. And excision, they want to conceal that practice because this is forbidden by the law in Guinea. But nobody said that excision should stop. And when we launch this fight, we are under threat because people will say that we have Western views, and people will say that an accomplice to the people of white color. But the traditions boil down to good practices. When you take a blade in order to excise young girls, that's not a good tradition. That's a poor tradition, but we need to think about that. We need to think about the way we can keep and retain our values. So you have blood that is being shed. There are young girls, I mean, who died because of blood hemorrhage, because excision is being done in countries where there is no care, there is nothing to save those young girls. And in fact, these young girls are hopeless because there's no one to save them. So when they die, it is because of the wizards, because the young girls have a bad soul. Otherwise, they would have survived. This is what people have said. So we have to remind people of the rights of young girls. And of course, we are liaising with the authorities because the authorities accepted to sign and ratify conventions and there are laws and regulations in order to penalize these practices. But the laws and regulations have to be enforced. But young people, associations have to do their job. So with the police forces, we decided to threaten the hangman. And if you don't cooperate, we will put your pictures on the social networks. And when these people are arrested, I mean, 2 weeks after, they are on the streets. I mean, these people were arrested, but they are bragging because they are still wandering in the streets. So today, of course, this fight is universal, but you have different dimensions with this fight. So in our country, people think that this fight is a matter for women, and people are scared. A young girl, a woman should stay at home cooking, cleaning the home, even though she's smart. People are being told young girls are being told to care for a husband. There are very few people who want to move away from that approach, and they refuse to accept that they want to be part and parcel of this fight. So I need to tell you that institutions have to earmark some funds in order to help those victims. I mean, I was on the field doing some advocacy, and I wanted the rights to be complied with, but it's not enough. My association, we shouldn't be alone. We need some help. We need some assistance. I have a dream, of course. I want to see a home of women at the home of women at Saint-Denis. We have some legal help, some legal support. I like this type of center in Guinea, and all together we can help us one another. It's a matter of survival. A big round of applause to Hadja. Thank you.
Merci. Merci beaucoup.
Thanks a lot. Unfortunately, there won't be a Q&A session. I mean, thank you for coming in droves, but you can still talk about those issues during the